Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at logic.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah. Well, maybe not the like the super technical philosophical side of it, more like
Right.
the logic that we use every day and how it can kind of lead us astray
Yes.
sometimes.
Yeah.
So we've got this source here called Logical Mistakes.
Okay.
And it's really interesting. It goes through all these examples of how even when we think we're being super rational,
Mm. Mm.
we can make like these little slip-ups in our thinking and give our listeners, a bit of a toolkit
Yeah.
for spotting these fallacies in their own lives and maybe even in the arguments of others.
I love that idea. It's like giving people a superpower.
Right.
The power to see through like bad reasoning.
Yeah, exactly. It's like being a logic detective.
And who doesn't want to be a detective?
Exactly. So to kick things off, one of the things that really jumped out at me from this source is this idea of illusory correlation. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah. Illusory correlation. It's a classic. It's basically when we see a connection between two things that happen close together in time,
Okay.
and we assume that one caused the other. But in reality, there's no actual evidence to support that link.
It's like, I wore my lucky socks to a job interview and I got the job.
Exactly.
Therefore, the socks are magic.
Right. Like they must have given you some kind of like career boost.
Totally. It's probably, your amazing qualifications.
Right. And all that hard work you put into prepping for the interview.
Exactly. But our brains, they love to find patterns, right?
They do.
So it's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking, oh, these two things must be connected because they happened, one after the other.
Yeah, it's like our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world
Right.
and create these neat little narratives.
Totally.
But sometimes those narratives, they're not really based in reality.
They're just stories.
Exactly.
And this illusory correlation thing, it's just one example of a whole bunch of cognitive biases that can kind of sneak
Well,
into our thinking.
right. Cognitive biases, they're like these mental shortcuts
Yeah.
that our brains use to simplify the world. And they can be useful, in a lot of situations,
Right.
but they can also lead to these systematic errors in judgment.
Yeah. And it's not like we're like consciously choosing to be biased.
No, not at all.
It's just kind of how our brains are wired.
Right. It's like they're operating on autopilot sometimes.
Right. So another one of these biases that the source talks about is the bandwagon effect,
Oh, the bandwagon effect. Yeah,
which I think is something we can all relate to, right?
totally. I mean, who hasn't been influenced by what everyone else is doing?
It's like just because lots of people believe something, it doesn't automatically make it true.
Right. Like think about insert a current pop culture example relevant to the listener.
Yeah.
Like huge fan base, super popular,
Oh, yeah.
but that doesn't mean their opinions are like gospel truth.
Totally. So popularity doesn't equal truth.
Exactly.
Got it.
It's easy to get caught up in the hype,
Yeah.
but it's important to like step back and think critically.
Absolutely. So we've got illusory correlation. We've got the bandwagon effect.
Yeah.
What other logical fallacies should we be on the lookout for?
Well, there's this one with a really fun name. It's called post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Yeah. Try saying that 5 times fast.
I'm not even going to try.
It's a mouthful, I know.
Yeah.
But basically what it means is assuming that because B happened after A, then A must have caused B.
So like if you eat a green smoothie and then you win a karaoke contest.
Exactly. You're like, oh, it was the smoothie.
Yeah, it was totally the spinach.
The magical
Gave me
scene.
those winning vocals.
Right. But again, just because two things happen in sequence
Doesn't mean
doesn't mean one caused the other.
right. There could be a million other factors at play.
Exactly. And recognizing this fallacy can help us avoid making these faulty assumptions
Okay.
about all sorts of things, from medical treatments to political decisions.
That's a good point. It's not just about like winning arguments. It's about making informed choices
Yeah.
in all areas of our lives.
Absolutely. The source really emphasizes that. Like being aware of these fallacies isn't about being like a logic nerd.
Right.
It's about thinking clearly and making good decisions.
Yeah. I have to admit, like, this is making me look at everything a little differently already.
I know, right?
Like, I'm starting to see potential logical pitfalls everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a bit overwhelming, honestly.
I get it. It can be a lot to take in at first. But the more you practice recognizing these patterns, the easier it becomes. It's like learning a new language.
Okay.
You start with basic vocabulary and grammar.
Right.
And eventually, you can have a conversation.
Right. You become fluent in logic.
Exactly. So don't get discouraged if it feels a little tricky at first.
Okay, good to know. So it's a skill you can build over time.
Absolutely.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
Wow.
But speaking of making assumptions, the source also talks about predicting the future.
Oh, yeah. Predicting the future. That's a whole other can of worms.
Right. And it points out how, like, we often use the past to predict what's ahead, which I guess on the surface makes sense.
It does.
Like we look at patterns, we look at trends.
Yeah.
But it also feels a little bit tricky.
It is tricky because while the past can offer clues, it doesn't dictate the future. Like, think about weather forecasts. They rely on sophisticated models, tons of data, but there's still a margin of error.
Right.
Unexpected events can always throw things off course.
Like a rogue butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil.
Exactly. Chaos theory and all that.
Right. And so the same goes for predicting things in our own lives, right?
Absolutely.
Like we can make plans, we can set goals.
Yeah.
But there's always that element of uncertainty.
Right.
I mean, if we could perfectly predict everything, life would be pretty boring.
Yeah, no surprises.
Right. No adventures.
Just a predictable script.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that we can't perfectly predict the future, it's actually kind of a good thing.
It is. It keeps things interesting.
Right. But at the same time, we still have this desire, right?
Yeah, we do.
To try to figure out what's coming next.
We want to feel like we have some control over our lives.
Exactly. And so the source talks about how people use all sorts of methods to try to predict the future.
Oh, yeah.
Like logic, obviously, but also emotions.
Intuition.
Yeah, and even divine guidance.
Right. Like some people look to their faith, their spirituality.
Right.
For answers, for guidance.
Yeah. It's like everyone's got their own method,
right.
Their own blend of rationality and intuition.
And maybe a little bit of like magical thinking thrown in there.
Exactly. and speaking of intriguing methods, the source mentions the Delphi oracles.
Oh.
You know, those ancient Greek oracles who were like famous for their cryptic prophecies.
Super mysterious.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about them.
Yeah, the Delphi oracles were fascinating. They were consulted on everything,
right.
From personal matters to affairs of state. Like people would travel from all over Greece.
Wow.
To seek their advice.
And so what kind of advice would they give?
Well, their pronouncements were often ambiguous, like really vague.
Like,
they lacked punctuation.
Oh, interesting.
Open to multiple interpretations.
So how did people even make sense of that?
Well, that's part of what made them so intriguing. This ambiguity actually played a key role in their authority.
Wait, what do you mean? How does being vague make you seem more authoritative?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, right?
Totally.
But think about it. People could interpret the oracles in a way that fit their own hopes or fears.
Okay.
Their own pre-existing beliefs.
Ah. So it was almost like a psychological trick.
Kinda, yeah.
Like making people feel like the oracle had this special insight into their lives.
Right, even if the message was open to interpretation.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a choose your own adventure prophecy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to the power of language, right?
Yeah.
How even a few carefully chosen words can have a profound impact on how we think and act.
That's a powerful thought. So
Yeah.
even back then, people were grappling with these ideas of logic interpretation.
And the human desire to know the future.
Right. It makes you wonder if we're like really so different from those ancient Greeks all these centuries later.
Right. Like, are we still searching for those same answers?
Yeah. Stay curious and never stop questioning the world around you. Until next time.
Happy exploring.
Happy exploring.